Welcome back to the podcast. We have a special episode for you today because this is an ongoing thing that I've been trying to do for the podcast. I talk a lot about oceans and protecting the ocean, and this is why you're here. You're here because of how to protect the ocean. That's the name of this podcast. Well, we protect the ocean by supporting businesses who have values that are there that are good for the ocean. And today we are showcasing one of those businesses that talk about these values, that have these values to not only just make people happy, but also just because this is what's important to them. You know, protecting the environment, making something healthy, taking away chemicals from food. And today we're going to be talking to Maddie Hamann, who's actually a former oceanographer, educated oceanographer, who is here to talk about the business that she co-founded with her husband called PACHA, which is a buckwheat bread, a loaf of bread that you could buy in the US and you can enjoy. It's tasty, it's healthy, it's made with not only love, but actually healthy things that are good for your body, less chemicals or no chemicals, and just something that's really good. She tells us how she makes the bread, how they make the bread, how the company came to be, how she went from oceanography to, supporting an organization or starting a company, co-founding a company that has to do with selling bread. We're going to talk all about that on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. Now, in today's episode, we're going to be talking with Maddie Hamann, who is an oceanographer, an engineer, and someone who's, quite intelligent and says, you know what, I want to make a difference in the world, so I am going to co-found a company that sells buckwheat bread. Now, did I expect that to happen when I first heard about PACHA, the company that she co-founded with her husband? No, I didn't expect to hear that one bit. But as I got to know more and more about the story, I started to think to myself, I said, hey, you know what? This is something that I think the audience would really appreciate. Somebody who changed their path multiple times because they wanted to have an effect on the planet. They wanted to do something that's good, not only for the planet, for the people who live on this planet. And she does that for, her customers. She does that for the company's customers. They have values that are good. And do they market based on, hey, we do some good things. We have really good values for the environment, for the planet, and for you? No, they say, this is great bread. You're going to want to eat it because it's tasty and it's a little good for you too, but it's really tasty. You're going to want it. And that's how they market it. I thought it was a really good episode that I think everybody should listen to. So enjoy this interview with Maddie Hamann, former oceanographer and now co-founder of PACHA Bread. Enjoy, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Maddie, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about PACHA and regenerative agriculture, all in the context of protecting the environment and growing a business?
Let's do this.
All right. I'm excited for this because, as I mentioned, this is a fun podcast. The stuff I've been wanting to do for a long time. I've been having businesses on that are good for the environment, that allow us to make better decisions for the ocean and for the environment in general, reducing climate change and so forth. And people can make a buck. And it just goes to show that you can grow your revenue and you can protect the ocean and the planet at the same time. So I'm really happy that you're here to share your journey. It's an interesting one because you do have a background in oceanography. So we're going to talk about that. But let's get to know you a little bit, and then we'll get to know PACHA a little bit. So why don't you just let us know, Maddie, who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So, my name is Maddie Hamann, and I am the co-founder and director of marketing for PACHA. We make an organic, gluten-free, sprouted buckwheat bread. And it is delicious and nutritious, and at the same time, it is supporting regenerative agriculture and saving the planet.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, you got your start in oceanography. That's what you went to school for. How did all that happen? Did you want to be an oceanographer when you were a kid? Can you take us through that process?
Yeah. So no, I wasn't the kid that always dreamed of being a marine biologist. I was a super nerd in school. I was always the A+ student, really good at math. And my journey kind of was well, I should just do the hardest thing because you can always switch out of the hardest thing if it's too hard or you don't like it or whatever. And so I went to school for civil engineering for my bachelor's degree, and sometime along the way, I realized like I don't really want to design highway overpasses for the rest of my life. That led me to fluid mechanics.
Okay.
Um, and one of my mentors in college, I took some of his graduate level classes on turbulence, and um, he kind of introduced me to the idea of oceanography.
Okay.
Um, and from the perspective of a civil engineer,
Hmm.
oceanography is studied like, okay, well, how can we protect our coastal infrastructure? How can we
Right.
understand how storms are going to impact
Yeah.
humans, etc.
Yeah. Very much like the Army Corps of Engineers, essentially. Like
Yeah,
that's
yes,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
but through that I discovered like, oh, well, there's people who are just purely studying the science of the ocean and the physics of the ocean. And so that is then I found myself interested in that and pursuing a graduate degree in physical oceanography after college.
Right.
And again, it was in some ways it was like, this seems like a really good way for me to use the very particular like math and science skills that I gained to help humanity. I was motivated by I mean, I came from the Midwest, and my understanding of what was happening with the planet was like, okay, the climate is changing. We must not know enough about it.
Mm.
Otherwise, like, things would be different. And so I thought going into grad school that understanding more about the climate and how the ocean impacts the whole ocean climate system would be the best way for me to help with the issue of climate change. And really, like, I mean, it was incredibly interesting and an amazing experience. I learned so
Yeah.
much. And the more I learned, the more I realized, like, wow, we know a lot. And that really knowing what was happening was not the thing that was going to start changing our behavior as a species on
True.
this planet. And there's sometime in my third or fourth year, I realized that I probably would not pursue pure research
Hmm.
as my life. I thought I would maybe get into science communications or
Yep.
something in that vein.
Yeah.
Um, and then it was in the last 2 years of my time as an oceanographer that I met my partner, Adam. He's my husband, he's my co founder, and he introduced me to the concept of regenerative agriculture. Um, and he's a serial entrepreneur.
Okay.
Um, and he has founded businesses, catering, restaurants, and then most recently a business called Boochcraft that makes a hard kombucha.
Okay.
And he was when at the time we met, he was in the space of uh, guiding their impact work. So figuring out how the money that Boochcraft was making could be used to help farmers implement better farming practices, like that are better for people's health and also just better for the
Right.
environment. And just kind of observing that, there was something that shifted in me. And then he kind of hired himself out of all of his roles at those companies, um, and found himself in a place like, well, I'm ready for the next thing.
Yeah.
And that happened to be this bread, um, what we now call PACHA bread. And yeah, he kind of got the ball rolling, and pretty soon in the early days, I realized that I wanted to be involved because I saw the opportunity to really like use business to shift the paradigm that the food system is currently in a way that actually sequesters carbon and actually makes a big difference for, many ways for the environment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You had quite the journey going from engineering to, okay, I know a lot about this. Going into grad school, I want to learn more about climate change and some of the things that we are. What do we know and how can I help? Contribute to that knowledge. And you're like, well, hold on a second, we know way too much about this, but we're not changing. Like, And which is so true. Like we do know a lot. We're still discovering things, but we do know a
Yeah.
lot. And it seems like every time we discover it, it becomes more and more grim and doom and gloom. And then we look around and people aren't changing. Now you happen to meet your now husband, who is also a serial entrepreneur, or who's a serial entrepreneur, but also for like seems like good for the planet type
Yeah.
of businesses. And then you get into this. So you basically went from I'm going to do something and do something really impactful and hard to I'm going to change the way we look at things so that we can help this climate change thing. We know a lot about climate change. Now we need to act. So I'm going to help in that action. That's quite the jump from like doing research to business and do that. Did you find that to be a difficult transition?
I mean, yes and no. I studied observational oceanography, so my
Okay.
group, my advisor, and my group, we would go out to sea and we would, we'd write grants, we would build
Yep.
instrumentation, we would take a whole crew of engineers and students out to sea to gather data, and then we would come back and analyze the data. And so, really, like, 2/3 of my thesis, I spent more on the side of like writing grants and administrating
Yeah.
my own. I collected my own data and wrote my own
Mm-hmm.
grant and everything. So a lot of that was like managing teams,
Yeah.
and so
True.
those skills transferred pretty readily. And then there's this whole section of my brain that's just like knows a bunch of differential equations that I don't really need to know
You
anymore.
may not need to know anymore. I don't know how you make the bread, but if you need to use differential equations, maybe that'll help. But for now, probably
Yeah.
not. But even going like you had that interest in maybe science communication and going into a marketing position or taking a
Yeah.
marketing position within this company, really saying, hey, look, like you look at science communication in a way of like changing behaviors around through the communication. And now you're like, okay, I want this behavior change to really go towards, I want you to buy the bread. And so how do I convince you to buy this bread? And now there's always a divergent way of doing things. For me, from a scientific and from a nature-based perspective, I'm just like, get this bread because it's probably good for you, but it's also better for the environment. So I'm going to make a decision because it's better for the environment. But
Right.
a lot of people who own these businesses are like, well, I want, like, people don't always buy that way. I'm not the regular, I'm probably out of the norm from your regular customer base. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but how was that to
Spot
going
on.
from convincing like, oh, look, this is good for nature, or to just be like, you want to buy this product because it's good for you, it tastes good, it's a different way of looking at bread. Like, how was that transition going from a very like oceanographic, very to the point type of writing style and communication style to, hey, this is some fun bread for you to eat and it's good for you?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'd say it's a different kind of to the point, but you're totally spot on. And what it's one of the things that has been, it's been a learning piece for me. And as somebody coming from a science background and into the world of marketing, it's like
Mm-hmm.
you you're doing this dance where you are in a way communicating, like trying to get a message across,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to be meeting people where they're at. And
Mm.
frankly, most people don't don't care about
This
the
is true.
sustainability piece. Like,
Yeah.
they could say that they care, but when push
Yeah.
comes to shove, it's like the bread has to be meeting a need
Yeah.
of theirs.
Yeah.
A lot of people's needs are in the cost arena,
Yeah.
and our bread is not the cheapest bread on the shelf.
Of course.
So the thing that we have to really lead with is like, hey, this bread, it's better for you. That is much more motivating for people than this
Yeah.
bread
The
is
health.
better for the planet that you live on. It's like it's too
Mm-hmm.
abstract a concept for people to say, oh, I'm going to spend $2 more on a loaf of bread because it's going to sequester some carbon or something. Like, no, people aren't
No,
their way.
no. It's more of an afterthought, right? Like, so
Yeah.
say I'm sharing the bread with somebody and like, oh, this is really good. I'm like, yeah, it's really healthy for you. It's got all this. It's got this amount of protein, this, reduced carbs and stuff like that. Then I can say, oh, by the way, it's also good for the environment. And they're like, oh, that's cool, but this really tastes good. Like that's probably, it's more of like the after, like the secondary thought afterwards, and be like, oh yeah, by the way, they do this new agricultural thing. And if you're interested in agriculture, then maybe you go on with that conversation. Is that pretty much on point?
Yeah, that's on point. And it's like, it's on point, and I'll just put some language to it. It's a customer retention tactic more than anything else.
Okay.
So someone starts buying our bread, and we don't lead our advertisement. Our hook isn't like bread that saves the environment.
Yeah.
That's not the hook.
Right.
The hook is, this bread is just tasty. It's
Yeah.
allergen free. It's like got good complete plant-based protein, etc.
Yeah.
And then they start getting our emails, and in
Yeah.
our emails we start talking about like, hey, did you know that this bread was grown with regenerative buckwheat? Or hey, did you know that our packaging is fully compostable, like home
Right.
compostable? And then
It's where the
people,
values of the company make a difference.
yeah, and
Yeah.
people start realizing like, oh, this company's really cool, like I want to keep buying from this company. I'm going to convince my kids to eat this bread,
Yeah.
even if it like, even if it's not the first thing that their kids are like,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah, it's a staple.
wanting
I
in the
mean,
morning.
let's be honest. Like, bread is a staple in a lot of households, right? Especially in North America, bread is a staple. And so, I grew up toasted in the morning, or I'll have a sandwich, or so it's part of that process. But lately, it seems as though over the past maybe decade, bread has become a bit of like regular bread, your typical bread that you buy in a grocery store. People have had gluten allergies.
Mhm.
People like, well, it has a lot of, it's complex carbs, so it's not like, or hard to break down in the body. It's gonna create like, it's not going to be healthy for you if you want to lose weight or you want to be in shape. You lose your bread, you feel better, all this kind of stuff. And this way, I'm looking on your website, it's like for people who've given up on bread. It's such a great message, because so many people have been like, screw that, I'm just going to avoid bread altogether. But people love bread. I love bread. I have like thoughts of my dad when I was younger, like on a Sunday, and eating like tea biscuits and in front of the TV with butter and stuff. And but like now I don't do it, because I'm like, well, this bread's not good for me. The ones that I buy at the grocery store. And how do I get good bread? So I think I love this messaging, because it's really just being like, this is a new way of thinking of bread, where you can have it. It's almost like have your cake and eat it too. Have your bread and eat it too, where you don't have to feel sorry for yourself after you eat it, right? So I think that's a really interesting messaging to get to. I love that. I like
Yeah,
that aspect.
I might steal that. Have your bread and eat it too.
Yeah, there you go.
Not bad.
Right, it's not bad. I've got a gift for a little bit of marketing. But let's talk about the bread. Like, why is it? Like you mentioned it a little bit before about regenerative agriculture, but like, how is this bread so different than the bread that we would like sort of the quote unquote typical bread that we would see in a grocery store?
Yeah. Okay, so there's two like important parts of this. One is
Okay.
the actual bread itself and why it's different nutritionally, ingredients wise. So our bread is, we make the bread from whole groats seeds, buckwheat
Right.
seeds.
Yeah.
Um, Buckwheat is not wheat. It's completely gluten free. It actually, the plant is, it's not like a grass. It's not a grain. It's like
Okay.
this little flower. It's like these little white flowers that have like a very green leafy plant, and it's a cover crop.
Okay.
Um, so it's completely different than wheat. It's a totally different thing. Um, High in protein. It's one of the only complete plant-based proteins. You got like your quinoa, your pumpkin
Mm-hmm.
seeds, your hemp, um, and buckwheat is one of the only. It's like 9 or 10 plant-based protein
Right.
sources um, that are complete. And so, and then we actually don't use flour to make our bread. We soak the whole seeds. So that process actually starts removing what are called anti-nutrients that bind to the nutrients that are in the bread.
Okay.
Like normally those things would just cause you to pass some of
Right.
the nutrients that are
Just
available
as
from the,
waste. Yeah.
yeah. And then we blend it, we ferment it. In the fermentation process, we use a wild fermentation. We don't add any yeast, but the yeast that are on the buckwheat groats ferment the bread, it kicks off the digestion process. So it's like almost like it's pre-digested.
Okay.
So the bread is really easy to digest. It's full of nutrients. Buckwheat's really high in magnesium, which
Okay.
is
Which is,
a
yeah, we,
bigger nutrient that most people are missing. And it's like anybody can eat this bread unless they're allergic to buckwheat, which is like 0.0001% of the North American population.
okay.
Um, so it really is like it just feels amazing.
Yeah.
It feels really good in the body, and I eat it every day, like multiple times a day.
And you don't get
Um,
like that, you know how some people, they have like, I've had bread before. Like I said, I love bread, and I feel groggy after. I feel kind of like, just sluggish after. And you're just like, why did I have so much bread and that kind of stuff? Almost to the point where like, I don't want, like, if I have a hamburger, a lot of times I just have the patty. I don't have the bread that
yeah,
goes with it, because I don't want to feel crappy after. So this, you're saying you actually don't feel that. You feel maybe energized or something like that. You just feel good. Like you can just go on with the rest of your day without
yeah,
being affected.
yeah.
Yeah.
It just feels good, and like you can eat a couple slices of pacha bread,
Yeah.
and you'll be full for the morning. Like
Yeah.
it's not
That's
like that
great.
quick, sugary
Yeah.
bread
Yeah. You get that little boost in energy
situation.
and crash. And
Yeah,
yeah. Okay. That's awesome. So,
yeah,
and now like that, so that's the first part
yeah.
of it. And then there's another part, which I assume is how it's grown and things.
Yes, yeah. And so then the second piece about the bread is, and this is the piece we don't always talk about first thing, but
Right.
um, all of our buckwheat is grown by certified regenerative farmers. And
Okay.
um, for your listeners who aren't familiar with regenerative agriculture, the basic idea is that regenerative farmers are taking care of their soil.
Right.
So by taking care of the soil, they're doing a few things. Well, they're turning they're turning carbon from the atmosphere into soil carbon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're making a really healthy, robust soil ecosystem, so that you can imagine like um, when you have like a new bag of potting soil, right? And
Yep.
you you can just see that it's all fluffy and airy and healthy, and you pour some water on it and it soaks it up like a sponge versus like compacted dirt from your kid's
Yeah.
playground or whatever. Yeah, it creates this ecosystem, this network that has air, and it allows life to move through it, and the life
Right.
is what's storing the carbon, all of the little critters that are
Yeah.
carbon-based life forms. And then like I mentioned, that soil is able to retain water. So
Just much
regenerative
better
farm,
than what you would normally, like regular farming and
yeah,
regular soil,
exactly.
right?
So like
Yeah.
if you can imagine on a conventional farm, you've got compacted soil that you're you're tilling the field, you're adding in your synthetic
Yep.
fertilizers to be able to grow something there, because there's the soil is lifeless.
Right. Right.
And then when it rains, a bunch of that dirt is being washed off the field. So we have major flooding issues
Yeah.
across the country. I mean, in California, I'm especially aware of it. But what you'll see in areas where there are regenerative farms is like the the conventional farms. If there's a big rain event, they've just got like ditches full of like red, muddy water.
Yeah.
And then you go onto the regenerative farm, and there's not even really a flooding issue at all, because the soil is taking up the water.
This is so crazy too, because like you think, if we look at how water moves nowadays, especially when we get these bigger rainfalls due to climate change and more sort of extreme weather patterns, even just regular weather patterns, you start to see water move differently. And
Oh yeah.
people are wondering what is going on. Is it the way, we're routing water, that which is part of it, but we never really talk about how soil changes over time, especially when we're farming everything. We go into like monoculture type of agriculture. We're going into like soil impacted, and we don't talk about how important it is for soil to be in a quote unquote healthy shape. And this regenerative farming practice, which is what we used to do
Yeah.
back in the day when we needed the soil to be good. we got out of that for some reason, and because maybe it was a quicker return, I'm not sure. And now we're starting to see some companies go back to it. It's just insane to me to really think about it, and we don't document that. We don't talk about it as much as we should, to say, hey, you know what, if we take care of our soil, like farmers take care of our soil and they're allowed to take care of the soil, we will get a much better system, like just environmentally, not only from a
Totally.
climate change perspective, but just from a safety and water movement perspective.
Totally. Yeah. And like, I mean, since we're on the water, there's more about regenerative agriculture, but when
Of
just
course.
from the water perspective, like in the oceans, there are huge issues,
Yeah.
dead zones just from the nutrient
Oh
runoff
my gosh. Yeah.
from, I mean, huge issues. The Gulf of Mexico is like,
Yeah. I used to work in there. Yeah. It's
it's
nuts.
gnarly.
Yeah.
But so the one, regenerative agriculture is removing the need for those synthetic inputs,
Yep.
like, or at least significantly reducing it,
Yeah.
so that you don't have this issue where people are just dumping nitrogen onto the soil, and then the
Right.
rain is washing it off down into the waterways. But there's also, there's a lot of issues on our reefs and,
Mm-hmm.
in our coastal zones, just from
Mm-hmm.
sediment itself, like
Yes.
sediment runoff affecting the quality, the
Mm-hmm.
water quality, you know the marine life that's in the coastal zones sometimes is damaged or killed by overloaded sediment from the
Well, if you think
waterways.
about just the impact of the Mississippi, how far it reaches into the Gulf of Mexico,
Yeah,
like that current that comes out of the Mississippi. I mean, oftentimes the impacts of hypoxia from the nutrient pollution and the phytoplankton growing, and we won't get into it, but that can go all the way to Texas. Like, it's
totally.
huge, and just the sediment carries, pretty far out there in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, or in the middle of like the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico. And it's insane to think about. We don't talk about it a lot, but it's insane to even think about how that soil that's going there could be already impacted from fertilizers, from chemicals that are used all the way up and down the Mississippi River.
Oh
It's
yeah,
that's obviously the major river in the U.S., but other rivers are pretty much impacted very similar,
yeah,
just not to that size, because it's just
yeah,
such a big river, and it
yeah,
travels so far up the Midwest.
for sure. Yeah, yeah. And so, like I said, there's other, you mentioned the chemicals. I'm just
Yeah.
thinking about, like, oh, swimming in the Ohio River. Oh,
Yeah.
not what I want to do. But yeah, the other major thing that is a boon for the environment and a boon for people's health is that regenerative agriculture is essentially like farming in a way that, the ecosystem is in balance. So when
Yeah.
you have an issue with pests,
Yeah.
like an example, slugs on an orchard. Cool.
Hmm.
Well, we just let our ducks in, and the ducks
Yeah.
eat the slugs. Like, we try not to separate the systems. The
Right.
systems
Right.
are intertwined, and the animals are a part of the culture. That's just one piece of regenerative agriculture,
Hmm.
but and then, on a greater level, just having more diversity in the plant life. So rather than having acres, hectares of
Hmm.
one plant, and, like, you know sometimes one genetically modified plant that has a lot of the same genetics, um, if a pest comes, or if a disease, a blight comes, it's going to knock everything out.
Yeah.
And so that's why they have to use the fungicides, the
Yeah.
herbicides, all this,
Yeah.
on those plants to protect them. And, in regenerative agriculture, the idea is, well, if there's more diversity, and if the fields are smaller and more spread out, then those kinds of diseases, they just can't travel, because there's just more genetic biodiversity in the
Well, and,
area.
and a lot of times too, like, because of the biodiversity present, a lot, and I don't know an example off by heart, but a lot of the times any invasive species or any species that comes in that could harm a specific culture, in this case, the buckwheat, might be deterred by other animals present, or
Yeah,
other plants that are present, that would ward off these types of invasive or animal life or disease that could alter, the growth and the health of the buckwheat or whatever you're culturing. Now, so this is interesting because you said something that really kind of made me interested, because I've been thinking about business and how everybody wants to grow their business and grow and grow and grow. And it's got to be big. It's got to scale. It's all this. When you have smaller, I guess, landmass, or keeping it I guess the growth of the buckwheat smaller because you have all this biodiversity, can you have a business that's sustainable that can still bring in revenue without, because you're having a smaller area maybe, without impacting, your bottom line or just sort of your lifestyle that you prefer? Like, is it a change in, it's a change in mindset? Maybe you're not growing all the time, or am I wrong? Is it a change in mindset when you have a company that uses regenerative agriculture compared to the others? 'Cause I assume that's the benefit for the others. You can scale really, really big and grow as much as possible, but there's a cost to that in terms of the
Yeah.
environment. Here, you're keeping it small, but you're keeping the environment intact, plus probably less upkeep and less chemicals.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. And I mean, there's certainly there's certainly issues where it's like, okay, regenerative agriculture, great solution for climate change, but it's not like we can flip a switch and
Right.
turn all of our fields onto regenerative agriculture right
Right.
away. Um, but from the perspective of our farmers,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them are already growing. They have their fields are separated, and they
Yep.
have certain things happening on
Yeah.
different parts of their property.
Gotcha.
Um, so we
So this is
what
just
we
one
have,
aspect of their farm.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And there's a lot of like crop rotation is a part of it too. So you can
Okay.
actually have quite a large,
Yeah.
like you can have a large farm that farms buckwheat. But it may just be that year to year they rotate
Yeah. That makes
where
sense.
that is being grown, and
Yeah.
that alone helps with the nutrient profile in the soil,
Right.
and the bio ecosystem,
Well,
the
and
soil
even from
ecosystem.
a farmer's perspective, do they like it more, like regenerative agriculture, than sort of what has become the conventional agriculture?
Yeah, I'm just gonna say yes, and but they may not know it yet. So, okay, so benefits for the farmers, for sure, they, they there's so many issues with farmers
Yeah.
and people in
Hmm.
rural areas with that where
Hmm.
they spray a lot of glyphosate, a lot of incidents of leukemia,
Yeah.
cancers, all many, many, many health issues that
Yeah.
arise from being exposed to those chemicals.
And we've
Um,
seen like the movies about Monsanto and, like, taking over
yeah,
specific areas and taking over farmers and genetically modified
yeah,
seeds and stuff like that. There's a lot of bad for business as well as bad for
yeah.
health, like human
There's
health too.
exactly. So there's the health side, and then
Yeah.
that also. So what has happened in our farming system, kind of going back to when we shifted away from regenerative agriculture, we created these synthetic fertilizers, and most of them
Hmm.
actually, a lot of them were created kind of in the post World War II era, where the chemical manufacturers were needing to figure out what to do with their
Yeah.
plants and
Yeah.
what they were going to produce. Um, so chemical
That's
fertilizers,
interesting.
and
Yeah.
you know, and it really, like, it was a miracle thing. You could improve your crop yields by
Yeah.
5x by
For sure.
inputting this chemical. But then it was kind of this loop, because every year you need to put a little bit more to get the same return on your field, because you're not taking care of the soil, you're relying on these chemicals.
Right.
And so what's happened is a lot of the farmers find themselves in a cycle where they need the synthetics in order to make the way they farm work. And a lot of them, they learned how to farm from their dad. They've been doing it
Yeah.
this way for 30 years.
Yeah.
It's hard to change your ways, and it's hard to learn something new.
Yeah.
And so it's not always an easy sell to be like, you really should be growing your food regeneratively. like just because they're like, well, I've always done it this way. I don't want to
Yeah.
change. But the farmers who do shift, one, regeneratively grown food can often bring in a premium price for
Right.
them. So
Yeah.
they can make more money on their crop, but they also can reduce their inputs. Like they don't have to spend money on the fertilizers and the pesticides and the herbicides.
Yeah.
So it's
That's
just like
huge.
a win all around, really.
Yeah.
And
Plus, they're not exposing themselves to these chemicals too. There's a danger in working with these chemicals.
totally,
You know, you have
totally.
to be careful. You have to wear certain types of gear and
Yeah.
so forth to be. And accidents happen. Like we obviously they try and reduce them, but accidents happen.
Yeah. There's a really excellent documentary called Kiss the Ground, which gives a
Hmm.
really good perspective on some of the regenerative farmers' takes on
Right.
this. And yeah, it's
Yeah.
powerful.
It's powerful. I mean, it takes. I think it takes these types of documentaries to educate people, like potential consumers or just people in the U.S. and Canada and elsewhere, where regenerative practices are trying to be put back in place, but are not. And we're looking at what our system has become. You know, you in marketing, you're trying to tell people about the benefits of this bread and like made from buckwheat and how good. Like I'm looking on the website, you got some pretty great reviews here for people. Does it take a lot to get people to try your bread?
Um,
Like, is it like I guess like, you know, from a digital perspective, when you're marketing and there's emails going out, or you have an ad on YouTube, or you have an ad on, or wherever you place your ads, or wherever you are present in terms of organically trying
yeah,
to educate people, does it take like a certain amount of times before someone's like, no, you know what, I'll try it?
yeah,
Or is it more of like word of mouth is really helping spread as people are trying it and
yeah.
saying, you got to
Well,
try this?
I mean, it's a little bit of both. So pacha bread, like I mentioned, it's not the cheapest thing on the
Yeah.
shelf. So we don't
Yeah.
have the benefit of like, oh, well, this is the cheapest one, so I'm just going to grab that.
True.
Um, but in terms of conversion rates and costs per acquisition, like
Yeah.
we're not in like it's not like we have to pay way more than the next company. You know,
Right.
we're on par with what we would expect
Yep.
in that
Yep.
zone. So it's not hard to get people to try it. It's not harder than it we would expect it to be.
Yeah.
um, yeah, and it really depends. Like, you know, some customers like it's just the thing they've been looking for, especially
Yeah.
for people who are allergen, like really allergen free, like celiac and um, like yeah, just can't
Yeah.
eat any of the
Yeah. It
a lot
makes
of
it
the
an easier
gluten-free
decision.
breads. Yeah, a lot of the gluten-free breads have like psyllium husk and guar gum and different kinds of binders that are not actually like mm, super digestible. So a lot of people who have inflammation and like irritable bowel syndrome, etc., they can't even really eat the
Yeah.
gluten-free options that exist. So
And I
to
know you're
find
going to be, I know
something,
you're going to be polite and say this, but a lot of people that I know who have gluten allergies eat gluten-free bread and they say it sucks. It's just the
yeah,
taste. It's from general, like not
yeah,
only like the irritation and stuff like that from it, but also they just say it doesn't taste good. You know, they don't
totally.
like the taste. They don't feel good after, just like you mentioned before. Like
Yeah,
it's a tough ask, especially, you know, when you have to make that change, right? And you're
yeah.
trying to find something new.
Yeah, and you know, pacha bread is it's not trying to be white bread. I think is the
Right.
other thing. It's just like in in some ways there's a lifestyle shift that
Yeah.
happens when you start eating pacha bread because you're not consuming it like I don't make sandwiches with my pacha bread. I make like open faced sandwiches or
Right.
I
Yep.
kind of use them as like we have English muffins and I like to make like egg sandwiches on that,
Oh
but
yeah.
it's yeah, it's just like a slightly different, it's almost its own category of food. So when you
Okay.
really getting people into pacha bread, like once people are in, they're like, I'm never going back. But
I see that. I
it can
see
be a
that review on
harder,
there. Yeah.
yeah, totally. However, we just released tortillas, and
Oh, cool.
yeah, they're incredible. They are made with the same base as our bread, so it's like two ingredients. It's just buckwheat and salt, and
Hmm.
yeah,
No
so
chemicals,
totally
nothing else
allergen
added. Like none of that. Eh?
nothing. They're and so they're
Interesting.
super clean,
Yeah.
allergen front allergen free, gluten free, and they're like they perform somewhere between a corn tortilla and a
Yeah.
wheat tortilla. Obviously, like the gluten in a wheat tortilla, just like you can fold it, you can stretch it, whatever.
Right.
That's really hard to achieve with the
Yeah.
gluten free
For
option.
sure. Yeah.
But our tortillas, they're like, we actually have quite a few people at our facility who are from Mexico who do the
Okay.
production, and they're like, this is
Like good tortilla.
this right here. Now this is a good tortilla. Like this feels
Okay.
authentic. Um,
Nice.
yeah,
That's good that's a good thing to have when you have like people who have tortillas on a fairly
yeah,
regular basis being like, yeah, this is what we want. Like this is
yeah,
the stuff. Yeah. That's
yeah.
awesome. So like when it comes to the company here, um and just the, obviously the values are high in terms of clean eating, less chemicals, no chemicals, buckwheat, going a different way of farming, regenerative farming. It's a big part of your values as a company. And like as you mentioned, it's not necessarily what you're marketing on, because you want people to taste the bread, you want people to go with what has it. How big of a part is the value part of your company to you as well as the staff? I believe there's what, about, is how many people work for you right now?
We've got like 20, 25.
25. Okay,
Yeah.
so like, small to medium sized company, but like how important is that to the staff, to you, to your husband, like co-founder Adam? Like how big was creating that value system, not just for the product, but just for yourselves as well? You being an oceanographer, understanding climate change, understanding what it can do, understanding the powerful impact of regenerative agriculture. When we talk a lot about ESGs and all these types of things, when we talk about values for companies, how big was that for all of you to create those values?
I mean, uh, I'll just say that the company wouldn't exist without the
Right.
values.
True. True.
Like, Adam and specifically our founding team, the people
Yeah.
who like birthed it, we were clear that this was why we were making this company,
Yeah.
like
So it
we're
wasn't it wasn't like let's make as much money as possible and that will screw the rest. It's let's make a great product for people, like that is healthy for people, that's good for the environment, and let's make some money while we do it. It's still a company, it's still a for-profit company, but we want to have, it has to be this. It has to have
yeah,
regenerative agriculture, like no chemicals, be good for people, be healthy for the environment. That was the big thing, right?
yeah. And I mean, and I also think that there's a genuine trust. I'm gonna
Mm,
belief isn't quite the word. It's genuine trust that this is where business has to go.
mm-hmm.
Like we 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 have to start doing this, and
Yeah.
Pacha is on the leading edge of a movement that is building and unfolding. And yeah, if
I
if we're
totally
gonna
agree.
have food farmed from our farmlands, we have to start shifting. There's like
Yeah.
an estimate that there are 60 harvests left from most of like 95% of the farmable land in our country. 60
Jesus.
harvests is like 30 years if we keep
Yeah.
going the way we're going. That's
Yeah. That's not good.
terrifying.
That is terrifying. That
Yeah,
is very terrifying. But when you install things like regenerative agriculture, now you're looking at extending that, like, I don't know.
indefinitely.
Yeah,
If you
indefinitely.
truly are caring for the ecosystem and
Yeah.
nurturing, like, just if the main thing you're caring for is the soil is going to care for you.
Yeah. Now, here's a question that you may or may not be able to answer, because, like, obviously, here's the problem: is like, we have a problem where we have 60 harvests left, about 30 years left of agriculture within the United States. I'm sure it's very similar to Canada. Regenerative agriculture really will help to make it indefinite. How do we make that shift on a larger scale, not just company after company, but just being like, we need to make this? Is that a policy decision that needs to take place to really move the needle? Or is it more of just education for business owners, or both?
Yeah, I mean, to move at the pace that I think we need to move at, it's attack on all fronts.
Yeah.
Um, I do think that policy is going to be key in making the shift. What exactly, what kind of policy that needs to be is
Yeah.
hard to say, like
Right.
one of the issues with regenerative agriculture is that it's actually not well defined.
Mm,
So
gotcha.
kind of like, you got your organic certification, and one of the issues with the organic certification was like, uh, we had to define it really well in order to make it a USDA certification. And in doing so, we actually, like, some of the heart of what it was got lost. And like,
Mm,
you can have hydroponically grown organic certified produce, which is like, well, it's not really what we were trying to do with the
yeah.
organic certification, but technically they are meeting all the standards.
Yep.
But in terms of making policy, like, yeah, I think one of the most, for me at least, one of the most interesting ideas is just implementing a carbon tax. I
Hmm.
think would be is potentially one of the most effective ways. But then
Yeah.
assessing like if there were a carbon tax and you were just, well, okay, there's two pieces. If there was a carbon tax and the you know also, most, we didn't say this, but most of the pesticides, herbicides, and the synthetic fertilizers, those are all petrochemicals. They're all made
Yes.
from petroleum.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so
Yeah. So you're reducing
just
that
that,
right away.
tax
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And get rid of the subsidies that currently exist for the wheat, soy, and corn that are grown in this country.
Mm,
We have the government is paying farmers to overproduce crops from these conventional systems, that would not be viable in the marketplace without the subsidies.
right.
People wouldn't buy them. Companies
Yep.
wouldn't buy them if they had to pay full price for them.
Of
If
course.
the farmers had
They're
to,
expensive. Yeah.
yeah. And so I think on a policy level, there's a lot that can be done,
Yep.
and it's complicated.
It is. Well, it's
Regenerative
also, it's
agriculture is
so,
complicated.
yeah, and it's so many people have, like, it's so ingrained in our system now, the current system of farming, that it would be difficult to go back to regenerative farming. Just like renewable energy versus, fossil fuel energy. It's not an easy switch. If it was easy, it would probably have been done already. But there's a lot of people who have a lot of money tied into these systems, and they do not want to change, and they want to keep their lifestyle, and they want to keep their money that they make, and it can be very difficult. But I love the fact that PACHA is like spearheading, just being like, you know what, like, we're just going to continue going what we're going to do, and we're going to show that it can be done. It can be done well, and we can be successful at doing it. And I think we just have to ensure that our values stay the same, and that we continue to challenge ourselves to continue to either grow our product type, or even just make our product even better and better as we go along, as we do more and more research. And I do love that. Now, to kind of to let people know, Pacha Bread, where can people find Pacha Bread to pick it up and give it a try?
Yeah. So easiest place, Whole Foods. We're nationwide in the frozen section.
Okay.
Um, and we also sell our bread nationwide through our website,
Okay.
livepacha.com. There's also, other independents and some smaller chains in Southern
Yeah.
California and the Pacific Northwest. If you want to try to find a physical location, we have a store locator on our website that you can check out. Yeah.
Awesome.
But if you want the
Awesome.
tortillas,
I
you got to
love
buy them online. Yeah.
Wonderful. I mean, this is great. I think this is really great to see this company continue to do what it's supposed to do, and to be good for not only the people that use it, but also for the environment. I love that. I love how you came on here and spreading your message. It's fantastic to have you on. I'd love to have you back on, Maddie, and maybe Adam would come on next time too, and talk about more about some of the products that you're doing, and some of the more about regenerative agriculture. I think we're just scratching the surface when we come in, how it can be implemented on a wider scale. But we want to thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story.
Thanks so much. It was great to be here.
Thank you, Maddie, for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was great to have you on. It was great to speak to someone who has pivoted so many times in their life to say, hey, you know what? I want to have an effect on the planet. I want to make sure that I do something good. And that's to start a business that not only has great values, but makes a great product that people can enjoy and they know it's healthy for them. And you don't market based on that. You market based on the tastiness and how it fits into their lives and why they should have it. But I really think this is something that we need to support more of. We need to support businesses that have these values, no matter what they're selling it on or how they're marketing their item. But they have these values regardless because they want to do something that's good for the planet, because we need to do something that's good for the planet. We need to talk about regenerative agriculture. This is something that's extremely important to not only the company, but also to our planet and how it can conserve water, how it can make sure that it's something that is a big thing. It's a big deal. It's good for the soil, which is good for the ocean. Eventually, it's good for the planet, which is good for you. And I think that is a great sales pitch. In my opinion, that's how it sells to me, but also it's great tasting bread and something I wish I can get access to on a more frequent basis. But I live here in Canada, and unfortunately, it's not available right now. Hopefully, in the future. But if you're in the US and you want to get access to it, I'll put the link in the show notes. You can find out where it's being sold. And I think it's Whole Foods, is just what she said. But so check out your local Whole Foods. But this is so great to be able to speak to someone like Maddie, who's got an oceanography background, understands the role of the ocean that plays in the regulation of our planet, but also looks at different aspects of life. You know, looking at regenerative agriculture as a way to protect the planet and to conserve the planet is something that's really interesting. And I just love the fact that she's out here doing this, building a business that's great. Her husband, who's, you know, a multi-entrepreneur, does a lot of different things, led them to this business here, and something that's very successful and something that's great with great values for the planet. So thank you again, Maddie, for joining us on today's episode. We're going to put the links to all the things that will lead her and connect you with her and the business of PACHA, and also buy the product if you can. If you're in the US, buy the product. But if you're not, just listen to the story. We don't need as many scientists in marine biology or even just conservationists. Well, of course we need them, but not as many as we need in businesses that will create great things, that have great values for the planet and for healthy systems in general. And that's what we need. So this is a great inspiration for that. So thank you again to Maddie, and thank you for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. If you have any questions or comments, you can get a hold of me just by, if you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment. If you're watching this or you're listening to this on the podcast app, you can go to speakupforblue.com/contact, fill out the form. It goes right to my personal email. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions or listen to your feedback. And also, if you want to get a hold of me on social media, you can do so on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. That's at How to Protect the Ocean. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.